A wealthy, sophisticated man boarded the first-class cabin with a scrutinizing gaze. But why did he suddenly flare up upon seeing the woman seated next to him? And why did everyone around fall into a silence so tense? It was as if something had clamped down on the entire cabin. The Boeing 737 sits heavy on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International, its engines humming with the promise of departure. Inside the cabin, the familiar symphony of modern air travel unfolds, the rustle of carry-on bags finding their homes in overhead compartments, the soft beeping of electronic devices being switched to airplane mode, and the gentle murmur of passengers settling into their seats for the 2-hour flight to LaGuardia. The recycled air carries hints of coffee from the galley and the faint leather scent of business-class seating. Amber cabin lights cast a warm glow over the forward section, where passengers in crisp business attire adjust their seat belts and organize their belongings. Outside the small oval windows, ground crew members in bright orange vests scurry about, completing their final safety checks. Flight attendant Jennifer Martinez walks down the aisle with practiced grace, her smile professional yet genuine as she assists passengers with their overhead luggage. The intercom crackles to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently number 3 for departure, and we expect to be airborne in approximately 15 minutes. Something electric hangs in the air today, an undercurrent of tension that experienced travelers might recognize. It's the kind of energy that precedes unexpected turbulence, though this disturbance won't come from the weather outside. Ella Williams settles into seat 3A with the quiet confidence of someone who belongs exactly where she is. At 28, she carries herself with the poised bearing that comes from years of discipline and achievement. Her navy blazer is impeccably tailored, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that speaks to both professionalism and practicality. In her hands, she holds a leather-bound flight operations manual, her fingers tracing familiar procedures with the muscle memory of expertise. To any casual observer, Ella appears to be exactly what she is, a successful professional traveling on business. Her carry-on bag, expensive but understated, sits neatly beneath the seat in front of her. Inside that bag, tucked carefully in a protective case, rest the gold wings that represent 8 years of rigorous training, countless hours of study, and a legacy that spans generations. Those wings tell a story of excellence earned through merit, of barriers broken through determination, and of dreams that refused to be grounded by other people's limitations. Ella's grandfather's voice echoes in her memory as she reviews the manual. Harold Williams had been one of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen, fighting 2 wars simultaneously, one against fascism in the skies over Europe, another against prejudice in his own country. "Excellence," he had told her during countless hours spent in his garage workshop. "Excellence is the only argument they can't refute. Let your work speak first, and your words will carry the weight of truth." The memory brings a slight smile to Ella's lips as she turns a page in her manual. She has built her career on that foundation of excellence. Top of her class at the Naval Academy, over 2,000 flight hours without a single incident, commendations from the Federal Aviation Administration for her emergency landing procedures, recognition as Pilot of the Year from her airline just 8 months ago. Each achievement has been earned through skill, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to safety that puts her passengers' lives above all else. The boarding process continues around her, a familiar choreography of travelers finding their places. Ella has witnessed this routine hundreds of times from both sides, as a passenger in her early career, and as a crew member preparing for departure. Today, however, she's positioned between worlds, flying as a passenger to New York, where she'll join another crew for the return flight home. A commotion near the boarding door draws her attention briefly. A late passenger is arguing with the gate agent about his connecting flight, his voice carrying the entitled edge of someone accustomed to having problems solved for him. Ella returns to her manual, making final notes about the weather conditions they'll encounter over the Carolinas. The leather seat beside her remains empty as the boarding process nears completion. Ella appreciates the space, knowing she can use the time to review approach procedures for LaGuardia's complex airspace. The morning departure means they'll hit the rush hour traffic patterns around New York, requiring extra precision and communication with air traffic control. Richard Sterling appears at row 3 with the harried expression of a man who's used to having his way but has just encountered unexpected resistance. His Italian leather briefcase bears the gold embossing of Sterling Financial, and his $1,000 suit wrinkles slightly from his hurried pace through the airport. At 55, Richard has spent his entire adult life in environments where his opinions carry weight and his preferences are accommodated without question. He stops abruptly when he sees Ella in the seat beside his assigned spot. His boarding pass clearly indicates 3B, but his expression suggests there must be some mistake. Richard's eyes narrow as he takes in Ella's presence, his mind already calculating how this situation differs from his expectations of business-class demographics. "Excuse me," Richard says, his tone carrying the particular brand of politeness that masks underlying irritation. "I believe there might be some confusion about seating assignments." Ella looks up from her manual with calm professionalism. "Good morning. Are you in 3B? Her voice carries the clear diction and confident tone that comes from years of radio communication in high-stress environments. Richard fumbles with his boarding pass, double-checking the seat assignment that he knows perfectly well is correct. "Yes, but—" He pauses, clearly struggling with how to phrase his concern without stating it directly. "I just want to make sure everyone is in their proper seats." The phrase hangs in the air between them, loaded with implications that both understand perfectly well. Ella has heard variations of this conversation before, though never quite so brazen, never quite so public. She closes her manual deliberately and gives Richard her full attention. "I'm in my assigned seat," Ella says simply, her voice maintaining its professional calm. "Is there a problem with your boarding pass?" Richard's discomfort becomes more apparent as he realizes his intended subtlety has failed. Around them, other passengers are beginning to notice the interaction, some pausing their own settling-in routines to observe the developing situation. Richard's jaw tightens as he processes Ella's response. He had expected compliance, perhaps even gratitude for his intervention in what he assumed was an obvious mistake. Instead, he faces quiet confidence and a direct question that puts him on the defensive. The polite smile he's worn throughout his business career feels strained now, threatening to slip entirely. "Well?" Richard begins, settling into his seat while maintaining the pretense of casual conversation. "I suppose I'm just surprised. Business class is quite expensive, you know." He emphasizes the word expensive as if it carries special meaning that Ella might not understand. "I flew over 200,000 miles last year alone. Delta Diamond status doesn't come cheap." Ella nods politely, returning to her flight manual. "Congratulations on your frequent flyer status," she says without looking up. Her fingers trace down a page of approach procedures, but she's acutely aware of Richard's continued scrutiny. The tension radiating from her seatmate is familiar. She's encountered it in briefing rooms filled with senior pilots, in airports across the country, and even in the cockpits where she's proven herself countless times. Richard isn't finished. He adjusts his seatbelt with unnecessary force, the metallic click sharp in the relatively quiet cabin. "It's just that I work very hard for these privileges," he continues, his voice growing slightly louder. I'm in corporate finance. Sterling Financial. Perhaps you've heard of us. We manage over $3 billion in assets. The number is intended to impress, to establish a hierarchy that Richard assumes Ella will acknowledge. Instead, she simply nods again, her attention seemingly focused on weather reports and runway conditions. This indifference strikes Richard as either ignorance or disrespect, neither of which he's prepared to tolerate. Flight attendant Jennifer Martinez notices the elevated conversation as she performs her final safety checks. Her trained eye catches the subtle body language that suggests brewing conflict. Richard's rigid posture, Ella's deliberately neutral expression, and the way nearby passengers have begun to pay attention. Jennifer has seen this dynamic before, though rarely so early in the boarding process. Can I get either of you anything before departure? Jennifer asks, positioning herself strategically in the aisle. Her question serves multiple purposes: offering service, gauging the situation, and providing a natural circuit breaker for whatever tension is building. Richard seizes the opportunity. Actually, yes. I think there might be some confusion about seat assignments. I'm Richard Sterling, Diamond Medallion member, and I specifically requested that my business class experience not be— He pauses, searching for the right words. Disrupted by any irregularities. Jennifer's professional smile doesn't waver, but her eyes sharpen with understanding. She's dealt with difficult passengers before, but the coded language Richard is using sends up immediate red flags. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but I'm not sure I understand what irregularity you're referring to. Ella closes her manual completely now, giving both Richard and Jennifer her full attention. She's reached the point where ignoring the situation is no longer possible, though her expression remains calm and professional. Mr. Sterling seems to believe I'm in the wrong section, she says evenly. I've shown him my boarding pass, but perhaps you'd like to verify it as well. The offer is made with such professional courtesy that it takes Richard a moment to realize he's been outmaneuvered. If he accepts Ella's offer to have her boarding pass checked, he'll be admitting his challenge was baseless. If he declines, he'll appear unreasonable. Jennifer recognizes the skillful deflection immediately. That won't be necessary, Jennifer says firmly. If you're both in your assigned seats, then everything is correct. She turns to Richard with a smile that's lost some of its warmth. Mr. Sterling, is there a specific service issue I can help you with? Richard feels the conversation slipping away from him. Around their seats, he notices that other passengers are listening, some with barely concealed interest. A businessman across the aisle has paused his phone conversation to watch. Two women in the row behind them exchange meaningful glances. The attention makes Richard uncomfortable, but also more determined to assert what he sees as his rightful authority. Look, Richard says, lowering his voice but not his intensity. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just think there's been a misunderstanding. This young lady seems very nice, I'm sure, but business class requires a certain investment. I've earned my seat here through years of loyalty and significant travel spending. The implication lands like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the immediate area. Jennifer's expression hardens almost imperceptibly. Ella's hands tighten slightly on her flight manual, the first sign of any emotional response she's shown. Mr. Sterling, Jennifer says with crisp professionalism, every passenger in business class has paid for their seat or earned it through our loyalty program. I assure you that all seating assignments are correct. But Richard isn't listening to Jennifer anymore. His attention has focused entirely on Ella, as if she's a puzzle he needs to solve. I'm just curious, he says directly to her. What line of work are you in? if you don't mind me asking. The question hangs in the air with loaded significance. Ella recognizes it for what it is. Not genuine curiosity, but a challenge disguised as conversation. She's faced similar questions throughout her career, from fellow officers who couldn't believe she belonged in military aviation to passengers who questioned her presence in the cockpit. Each time, she's had to prove herself in ways that her male colleagues never experience. Ella sets her manual in her lap and meets Richard's gaze directly. "I work in aviation," she says simply. Richard's eyebrows rise with what might be surprise or skepticism. Aviation? That's interesting. What do you do in aviation? Customer service? Gate management? The assumptions embedded in his questions are clear to everyone listening. Jennifer takes a half step closer, her body language shifting from professional courtesy to protective alertness. The businessman across the aisle has abandoned his phone call entirely, watching the interaction with growing concern. Ella's smile is slight but unmistakably confident. "I fly," she says. Richard's laugh has a sharp edge to it, the sound of someone who believes he's caught another person in an obvious lie. "You fly?" he repeats, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure that surrounding passengers can hear. "What do you fly? Charter flights? Small aircraft for sightseeing tours?" The condescension in his tone is no longer hidden behind polite conversation. Richard has abandoned subtlety in favor of direct challenge, confident that he's exposing what he sees as Ella's pretensions. His years in corporate finance have taught him to spot inconsistencies, to challenge claims that don't align with his expectations of how the world works. Ella's expression doesn't change, but something in her posture shifts almost imperceptibly. Flight attendant Jennifer recognizes the signs of someone who has been pushed to their limit of patience. The other passengers sense it too, a stillness that suggests the calm before a storm. "I fly commercial aircraft," Ella says with the same professional tone she's maintained throughout the encounter. "For this airline, actually." Richard's skepticism deepens into open disbelief. "Come on," he says, his voice rising slightly. "You're what, 25? 26? Do you really expect me to believe that someone your age, someone who looks like—" He catches himself before finishing the sentence, but the implication hangs in the air like smoke. Jennifer steps forward, her training kicking in as she recognizes a situation spiraling toward a formal complaint. "Mr. Sterling, I'm going to need to ask you to lower your voice and return to your own concerns. This conversation is becoming disruptive to other passengers." But Richard is beyond caring about other passengers. He's committed now to what he sees as exposing a fraud, convinced that Ella is lying about her profession for reasons he can't fathom but feels compelled to uncover. "I'm not being disruptive," he says to Jennifer, without taking his eyes off Ella. "I'm simply asking reasonable questions. If she's really a pilot for this airline, then she should be able to prove it. The challenge is direct now, impossible to ignore or deflect." Ella feels the weight of every gaze in the business class cabin. She's familiar with this moment, the point where professionalism and dignity intersect with the ugly reality of prejudice. Her grandfather's voice echoes in her memory again, reminding her about letting people show their true colors before responding. "What kind of proof would satisfy you, Mr. Sterling?" Ella asks quietly. Richard's confidence surges. Finally, he thinks, she's admitting that she can't back up her claims. Well, for starters, pilot's license, employee identification. Something that proves you're not just saying whatever you think will end this conversation. The businessman across the aisle shifts uncomfortably in his seat. Behind them, the two women who had been watching exchange shocked glances. The atmosphere in the cabin has changed completely, the earlier sounds of settling passengers replaced by an uncomfortable silence as people try to process what they're witnessing. Jennifer realizes that the situation has moved beyond her authority to handle quietly. She touches the small communication device at her belt, sending a discreet signal to the cockpit. "Mr. Sterling," she says with forced calm, "I'm going to need you to respect other passengers' privacy. No one is required to show you their personal documentation." Richard waves dismissively at Jennifer, his attention still locked on Ella. Privacy. She's the one making claims about being a pilot. If she's going to lie, she should expect to be called out on it. The word lie cuts through the cabin like a blade. Ella's hands tighten on her flight manual, and for the first time, her professional composure shows the slightest crack. She's been questioned, doubted, and challenged throughout her career, but rarely has anyone accused her of outright deception about her qualifications. A new voice cuts through the tension from the front of the cabin. "Is there a problem back here?" Captain James Henderson's presence fills the narrow aisle as he approaches row 3. At 52, Captain Henderson carries the authority that comes from 25 years of commercial aviation and countless hours in the cockpit of everything from regional jets to wide-body aircraft. Richard straightens in his seat, finally sensing that the situation might be moving beyond his control. But his conviction remains strong. "Captain," he says with renewed confidence. "Yes, there is a problem. This passenger is claiming to be one of your pilots, which is obviously ridiculous. I think she's trying to scam her way into business class, and I want it addressed." Captain Henderson's eyes move from Richard to Ella, and something passes between them. A look of recognition that Richard doesn't catch, but Jennifer notices immediately. "I see," Captain Henderson says slowly. "And you are?" "Richard Sterling. Sterling Financial. Delta Diamond member for 7 years running. I fly over 200,000 miles annually, and I've never seen anything like this kind of deception." Captain Henderson nods thoughtfully, then turns his attention to Ella. "Ma'am, I understand there's some question about your profession." Ella meets the captain's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. Mr. Sterling has requested proof that I work for the airline." The formal tone of Ella's response, the way she automatically shifts into the professional deference that exists between crew members of different ranks, sends a signal that Captain Henderson receives loud and clear. But Richard, unfamiliar with aviation hierarchy and communication patterns, misses the significance entirely. "Exactly," Richard says, feeling vindicated by what he interprets as the captain taking his side. "I mean, look at her. Does she look like someone who could handle flying a commercial aircraft? Be serious." The cabin has gone completely silent now. Even passengers several rows away have stopped their conversations to watch. Flight attendant Jennifer stands frozen, recognizing that they've reached a moment that will define how this entire situation resolves. Captain Henderson's expression doesn't change, but his voice carries a new edge when he speaks. "Mr. Sterling, I want to make sure I understand your position clearly. You're suggesting that this passenger's appearance disqualifies her from being a commercial pilot?" Richard, missing the warning in the captain's tone, doubles down. "I'm saying let's be realistic here. I work in finance. I understand probabilities and demographics. The likelihood that someone who looks like her is actually qualified to fly commercial aircraft is essentially zero." The words hang in the air like a toxic cloud. Ella's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Jennifer closes her eyes briefly, as if in pain. Captain Henderson's expression remains neutral, but something dangerous flickers in his eyes. "I see," Captain Henderson says quietly. "Well, Mr. Sterling, I think it's time we resolved this situation definitively." Captain Henderson's words carry a weight that makes every passenger in hearing distance hold their breath. Richard Sterling feels a surge of vindication, interpreting the captain's intervention as validation of his concerns. He settles back in his seat with visible satisfaction, confident that authority has finally arrived to restore what he sees as proper order. "Thank you, Captain," Richard says with renewed smugness. "I appreciate you taking this seriously. As a Diamond member, I expect a certain standard of service, and this kind of situation really shouldn't be tolerated." Ella remains perfectly still, her hands folded over her flight manual. She knows exactly what's about to happen, but her training has taught her the value of letting situations develop fully before taking action. Her grandfather's lessons echo in her mind. Sometimes the most powerful response is patience. Captain Henderson nods slowly, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Sterling, you've raised some very serious concerns about one of my passengers. Before we proceed, I want to make sure I have all the facts correct." He pulls out a small notebook, the kind airline personnel use for incident reports. "You're claiming that this passenger is fraudulently representing herself as an airline pilot?" Richard straightens, feeling more confident as the situation takes on an official tone. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Look, I don't want to be the bad guy here, but we can't just let people make false claims about their profession. It's dishonest, and frankly, it's probably illegal." The businessman across the aisle shifts uncomfortably, finally speaking up. "Excuse me, but is all this really necessary? Can't we just—" "Sir," Richard cuts him off sharply, "this doesn't concern you. I'm dealing with a serious case of fraud here." He turns back to Captain Henderson. "Captain, I run a financial services company. I deal with fraud investigations regularly. This woman is clearly lying about being a pilot, probably to get sympathy or special treatment." Captain Henderson makes a note in his pad. "I see. And what evidence do you have that she's lying?" Richard gestures broadly at Ella. "Just look at her! She's young, she's—" He pauses, clearly wanting to say more, but sensing he's already ventured into dangerous territory. "She doesn't fit the profile. I've flown millions of miles, Captain. I know what pilots look like." The silence that follows Richard's statement is deafening. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seem muted as passengers process what they've just heard. Ella's expression remains neutral, but something in her eyes hardens. Flight attendant Jennifer finally finds her voice. "Captain, perhaps we should—" "It's all right, Jennifer," Captain Henderson says calmly. "Mr. Sterling has made some very specific accusations, and they deserve to be addressed properly." He looks directly at Richard. "You're stating for the record that you believe this passenger is incapable of being a commercial pilot based on her appearance?" Richard, emboldened by what he perceives as official support, becomes more explicit. "I'm saying it's statistically impossible. Commercial aviation is a serious profession that requires extensive training, technical knowledge, and years of experience. You don't just walk into a cockpit because you want to play pilot." Ella's fingers tighten slightly on her manual, but her voice remains steady when she speaks. "Mr. Sterling, what exactly about my appearance suggests I lack the qualifications for commercial aviation?" The direct question catches Richard off guard. He had expected Ella to remain silent while the authorities handled the situation. Instead, she's forcing him to articulate the prejudices he's been dancing around for the past several minutes. "Well," Richard stammers, "you're very young, for one thing. Pilots need years of experience, and—" He glances around, suddenly aware that his words are being heard by dozens of passengers. "And statistically, the demographics of commercial aviation are quite clear." "The demographics," Ella repeats flatly. "Could you be more specific?" Richard's discomfort is becoming more apparent, but he's committed too deeply to back down now. "Look, I'm not trying to be politically incorrect here, but commercial aviation is dominated by certain demographics. That's just reality." The businessman across the aisle shakes his head in disgust. "This is getting ridiculous," he mutters loud enough for others to hear. Behind them, one of the women who had been watching finally speaks up. "Excuse me, but this is completely inappropriate. You can't just harass someone because of how they look." Richard spins around to face his critics. "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm pointing out an obvious fraud. If she's really a pilot, then prove it. Show credentials. Answer technical questions. Do something other than just sit there claiming to be something she obviously isn't." Captain Henderson closes his notebook with a decisive snap. "Mr. Sterling, you've made your position very clear. You believe this passenger is fraudulently claiming to be a commercial pilot based solely on your assessment of her appearance and what you consider to be statistical probabilities." "Exactly," Richard says, relief evident in his voice. "Now you understand the problem." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Captain Henderson replies, his tone carrying new gravity. "The question now is how we resolve this situation." He turns to Ella. "Ma'am, Mr. Sterling has demanded proof of your credentials. How would you like to handle his request?" Ella looks up at Captain Henderson, and again, something passes between them that Richard doesn't catch. "Well, Captain," Ella says slowly, "Mr. Sterling does seem very concerned about airline safety and proper credentials. Perhaps we should address his concerns comprehensively." Richard nods vigorously. "Absolutely. Let's get this cleared up once and for all." Captain Henderson's expression grows more serious. "Very well. Mr. Sterling, since you've made such serious allegations, I think it's appropriate that we handle this through proper channels." He reaches for his radio. "Ground control. This is Captain Henderson on flight 8742. We have a passenger dispute that may require documentation." The radio crackles to life. "Copy, Captain Henderson. Do you need security assistance?" Richard's face goes pale. The mention of security wasn't part of his plan. He had expected a quick resolution where Ella would be quietly moved to economy class or removed from the flight entirely. The prospect of formal documentation and security involvement suggests consequences he hadn't considered. "Captain," Richard says quickly, "I don't think we need to involve security. I just want the seating issue resolved." "But Mr. Sterling," Captain Henderson replies with seeming innocence, "you've accused a passenger of fraud. That's a federal crime. Surely we need to take your allegations seriously." Ella watches the exchange with growing appreciation for Captain Henderson's handling of the situation. She recognizes the tactical brilliance of forcing Richard to confront the full implications of his accusations. Well, maybe fraud is too strong a word." Richard backpedals. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Captain Henderson's eyebrows rise. "But you were very clear that she was lying about being a pilot. You called it obviously ridiculous and statistically impossible. Those don't sound like the words someone uses to describe a simple misunderstanding." Richard is trapped now between his earlier statements and his growing realization that the situation has spiraled beyond his control. The other passengers are watching with expressions ranging from fascination to disgust, and he can feel their judgment weighing on him. "Look," Richard says, desperation creeping into his voice. "Maybe I was hasty. Maybe she is what she says she is. Can't we just forget about all this?" Captain Henderson appears to consider this request carefully. "I suppose we could do that, Mr. Sterling. But first, I think we owe this passenger an apology for the distress you've caused her. And perhaps we should verify her credentials, just to put your mind at ease." Richard realizes he's being maneuvered into a corner, but he can't see a way out that doesn't involve admitting he was wrong from the beginning. "Fine," he says reluctantly. "If she can prove she's actually a pilot, then I'll apologize." Ella looks up at Captain Henderson with a slight smile. "Captain, I think that's very reasonable. Mr. Sterling deserves to have his concerns addressed properly." Captain Henderson nods formally. "Very well then. Ma'am, If you could come with me, we'll resolve this matter definitively. As Ella stands to follow Captain Henderson toward the front of the aircraft, Richard settles back in his seat with visible relief. Finally, he thinks, this charade will be exposed and normal order will be restored. He has no idea that he's about to experience the most humiliating moment of his adult life. Captain Henderson's voice carries clearly through the business class cabin as he stops beside row 3, his presence commanding immediate attention from every passenger within earshot. The aircraft's engines have settled into their pre-flight idle, creating a backdrop of mechanical precision that seems to emphasize the human drama unfolding in the forward cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Henderson announces, his tone carrying the authority that comes from decades of commercial aviation. "I apologize for the disruption to your boarding experience. We've had some concerns raised about crew credentials, and I believe in addressing such matters transparently." Richard Sterling straightens in his seat, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Finally, he thinks, proper protocol is being followed. He glances around at the other passengers, many of whom are now openly watching the proceedings, and feels vindicated in his persistence. Someone needed to call out this obvious deception, and he had been brave enough to do it. Ella Williams stands beside Captain Henderson with the same composed professionalism she's maintained throughout the encounter. Her navy blazer is perfectly pressed, her posture straight and confident. In her hands, she still holds the leather flight manual she'd been reviewing, though now it seems less like casual reading material, and more like evidence of something Richard hasn't yet grasped. "Mr. Sterling," Captain Henderson continues, "you've expressed serious concerns about this passenger's qualifications and credibility. You've suggested that her appearance makes it statistically impossible for her to be a commercial pilot. Is that an accurate summary of your position?" Richard nods firmly, though something in Captain Henderson's tone makes him slightly less comfortable than he'd been moments before. "That's correct, Captain. I simply believe in honesty and proper procedures. If someone is going to claim they're a pilot, they should be able to prove it." "I absolutely agree," Captain Henderson replies, his words causing Richard's confidence to surge. "Professional credentials in aviation are extremely important. Lives depend on proper training and qualifications." He pauses, letting that statement settle. "Which is why I want to introduce everyone to First Officer Ella Williams." The words hit the cabin like a physical force. Richard's smile freezes on his face as his brain struggles to process what he's just heard. Around him, passengers gasp audibly, some leaning forward in their seats to get a better look at Ella, others simply staring in shock. "First Officer Williams," Captain Henderson continues with deliberate formality, "has been assigned as my co-pilot for today's flight to LaGuardia. She's currently deadheading to New York, where she'll join Flight 6789 for the return trip to Atlanta this evening." Ella steps forward slightly, her professional bearing now taking on new significance for everyone watching. "Good morning," she says to the cabin at large, her voice carrying the clear, confident tone that comes from years of radio communication in high-stress environments. "I apologize for any confusion about my presence in the passenger cabin today." Richard's mouth opens and closes soundlessly. The word impossible forms on his lips, but no sound emerges. His face has gone completely pale, and his hands grip the armrests of his seat as if the aircraft is experiencing severe turbulence. The businessman across the aisle, who had been watching the confrontation unfold, suddenly sits up straighter. "Wait," he says, recognition dawning on his face. "Officer Williams? Ella Williams?" He turns to address her directly. "You flew my family and me to Miami last month. Flight 2347. You made an announcement about weather conditions over Georgia." Ella's professional smile warms slightly. "Mr. Peterson, isn't it?" I remember that flight. Your daughter was nervous about flying, and you asked me to explain how aircraft handle turbulence. That's right. Mr. Peterson's face lights up with genuine pleasure. She was so impressed when you took the time to visit the cabin during cruise flight. You told her about your training and how safety systems work. He looks around at the other passengers. This woman is absolutely brilliant. She explained complex aviation concepts in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Richard's world is collapsing around him with each word of this unexpected testimony. His earlier confidence has evaporated completely, replaced by a growing horror as he realizes the magnitude of his mistake. He tries to speak, but only manages a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at the word "but." Captain Henderson's expression has grown more serious. Mr. Sterling, I believe you owe First Officer Williams an apology. Your accusations were not only baseless but deeply inappropriate. The cabin has gone completely silent except for the ambient sounds of the aircraft's systems. Every passenger within hearing distance is focused on Richard's response, waiting to see how he'll handle this moment of reckoning. I didn't. Richard's voice comes out as barely a whisper. How was I supposed to know? Ella's response is calm and professional, but there's steel underneath her words. Mr. Sterling, you weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to treat a fellow passenger with basic courtesy and respect, regardless of what assumptions you might have made about my qualifications or background. The weight of Ella's words, delivered without anger or vindictiveness, somehow makes them more devastating than any emotional outburst could have been. Richard realizes that she's not just correcting him about her profession. She's pointing out a fundamental failure of character that goes far deeper than a simple mistake. Flight attendant Jennifer Martinez steps forward, her earlier attempts at professional neutrality replaced by clear support for Ella. First Officer Williams, she says formally, would you like me to document this incident for the flight report? Ella considers this for a moment, then shakes her head slightly. I think Mr. Sterling understands the situation now. Don't you, Mr. Sterling? All eyes turn to Richard, who seems to be struggling with the basic mechanics of forming words. The confident corporate executive who had demanded proof and challenged credentials has been replaced by a man who appears to be questioning everything he thought he knew about the world. Officer Williams, Richard finally manages, his voice cracking slightly. I owe you an apology. I was completely wrong. I made assumptions that were... He stops, unable to find words adequate to describe the depth of his error. Ella nods graciously. Apology accepted, Mr. Sterling. We all make mistakes, but Captain Henderson isn't finished. Mr. Sterling, I want to make sure you understand something. First Officer Williams isn't just any pilot. She graduated at the top of her class from the Naval Academy. She has over 2,000 hours of flight time with a perfect safety record. She was named Pilot of the Year by this airline just 8 months ago. When you questioned her qualifications based on her appearance, you weren't just wrong, you were spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Each credential that Captain Henderson lists lands like a physical blow to Richard's already devastated ego. The other passengers are now looking at him with expressions that range from disgust to pity, and he realizes that his reputation on this flight, and possibly beyond, is utterly destroyed. Ella reaches into her carry-on bag and withdraws a small leather case. From it, she takes the gold pilot wings that represent years of training, sacrifice, and achievement. She pins them to her blazer lapel with practiced ease, the simple action transforming her appearance from passenger to crew member in the eyes of everyone watching. Mr. Sterling, Ella says quietly, my grandfather was a Tuskegee airman. He flew combat missions over Europe when people like you said he didn't belong in a cockpit. He taught me that excellence is the only argument that prejudice can't refute. I've spent my entire career proving that lesson correct. The historical reference adds another layer to Richard's humiliation. Not only has he attacked someone based on prejudiced assumptions, but he's done so against someone whose family has a distinguished legacy of overcoming exactly this kind of discrimination. Captain Henderson's radio crackles to life. Flight 8742, this is ground control. We're ready for your pushback when you are. Ground control, we'll be ready in just a moment. Captain Henderson responds. He turns back to the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, First Officer Williams and I need to complete our pre-flight preparations. I trust this matter is now resolved to everyone's satisfaction. As Ella follows Captain Henderson toward the cockpit, the cabin erupts in spontaneous applause. Passengers who had been silent observers throughout the confrontation now openly show their support and admiration. Mr. Peterson starts the clapping, but it quickly spreads throughout the business class section and into the main cabin as word of what happened filters back through the aircraft. Richard Sterling sits alone in his seat, surrounded by applause for the woman he had tried to humiliate, feeling smaller than he has ever felt in his adult life. The applause continues for nearly 30 seconds, a sustained sound of approval and vindication that fills the cabin with positive energy, even as it deepens Richard Sterling's humiliation. He sits frozen in his seat, his earlier confidence completely shattered, watching as Ella Williams acknowledges the passengers' support with gracious nods before disappearing into the cockpit with Captain Henderson. The businessman across the aisle, Mr. Peterson, leans forward to address Richard directly. You know, he says, his voice carrying disappointment rather than anger, I've flown with Officer Williams before. She's one of the most professional, skilled pilots I've ever encountered. What you put her through was completely unnecessary and frankly disgusting. Richard tries to respond, but the words stick in his throat. Around him, other passengers are engaged in animated conversations about what they've just witnessed. Their voices carry clearly in the confined space of the cabin, and every comment feels like another nail in the coffin of Richard's dignity. Can you believe that guy? A woman several rows back asks her companion. The audacity of challenging someone's credentials based on how they look? I know, her friend replies. And she handled it with such class. I would have lost my temper completely. Flight attendant Jennifer Martinez returns to the business class section, her professional demeanor intact, but her eyes cold when they settle on Richard. Mr. Sterling, she says formally, I need you to know that this incident will be documented in our flight report. The captain has also requested that your frequent flyer status be reviewed by our customer relations team. The words hit Richard like physical blows. His diamond medallion status represents years of loyal travel and significant financial investment with the airline. The prospect of losing those privileges adds a practical dimension to his humiliation that makes everything feel more real and more permanent. Please, Richard says, his voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Can't we just forget this happened? Jennifer's expression doesn't soften. Mr. Sterling, you accused a member of our flight crew of fraud. You demanded to see her credentials based solely on your personal prejudices. This isn't something we can simply forget. The cabin's public address system crackles to life, and Ella's voice fills the aircraft with calm professionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Williams speaking from the cockpit. We've been cleared for pushback and expect to be airborne in approximately 10 minutes. Weather conditions are favorable, and we anticipate a smooth flight to LaGuardia with an on-time arrival. The routine announcement takes on special significance, given what has just transpired. Passengers listen with heightened attention, many smiling at the sound of Ella's voice coming from the cockpit where it belongs. For Richard, the announcement is another reminder of how completely wrong he was about everything. Mr. Peterson pulls out his phone and begins typing rapidly. "I'm posting about this on LinkedIn," he announces to no one in particular. "People need to hear about Officer Williams and how she handled this situation. This is exactly the kind of professionalism and grace under pressure that we should be celebrating." Richard's face goes even paler at the mention of social media. The prospect of this incident being shared online, potentially reaching his colleagues, clients, and business associates, adds a new dimension of terror to his situation. "Please," he says to Mr. Peterson, "please don't post anything about this. I've learned my lesson. I don't need to be publicly humiliated." Mr. Peterson looks at Richard with genuine surprise. "You don't need to be publicly humiliated. What do you think you just put Officer Williams through? The difference is, she didn't deserve it." The aircraft begins to push back from the gate, the subtle movement marking the beginning of the flight that Richard had been looking forward to just an hour earlier. Now, the prospect of spending the next 2 hours in this confined space, surrounded by people who witnessed his spectacular failure of judgment, feels like a form of torture. A middle-aged woman seated behind Richard leans forward to tap him on the shoulder. "Excuse me," she says when he turns around. "I just wanted you to know that I've never been more embarrassed to be on the same flight as someone. What you did was absolutely shameful." Richard turns back to face forward without responding, his face burning with humiliation. The woman's words sting particularly because they're delivered without anger or drama, just a simple statement of moral judgment that he finds impossible to refute. As the aircraft taxis toward the runway, Captain Henderson's voice comes over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to personally thank you for your patience during our earlier delay. I'm proud to be flying today with First Officer Williams, who exemplifies the highest standards of our profession. We're fortunate to have her expertise in the cockpit." The announcement draws another round of applause from the passengers, this one even more enthusiastic than the first. Richard realizes that Captain Henderson's words are a deliberate reminder of Ella's qualifications, and a subtle rebuke of Richard's earlier challenges to her credibility. Jennifer approaches Richard's seat one more time, this time carrying an incident report form. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to sign this documentation of today's events. It's standard procedure when we have passenger disputes involving crew members." Richard stares at this form with growing dread. His signature on an official incident report will create a permanent record of his behavior, something that could potentially be referenced in future interactions with the airline or even in legal proceedings if Ella decides to pursue them. "Do I have to sign this?" he asks weakly. "It's strongly recommended," Jennifer replies. "Refusing to sign could result in additional complications, including potential removal from the flight." With shaking hands, Richard signs the form, each letter of his name feeling like an admission of guilt that will follow him long after this flight is over. As Jennifer takes the form away, Richard slumps back in his seat, finally beginning to grasp the full scope of the consequences he's facing. The aircraft reaches the runway and pauses as Captain Henderson and First Officer Williams complete their final safety checks. Through his window, Richard can see other aircraft waiting their turn for departure, a reminder that the world continues to function normally, even as his personal world has collapsed entirely. Ella's voice returns to the intercom for the final pre-departure announcement. "Flight attendants, please prepare for takeoff." Her voice carries the same calm authority that Richard had dismissed as impossible just 30 minutes earlier. As the engines spool up to full power and the aircraft begins its takeoff roll, Richard Sterling sits in humiliated silence, surrounded by passengers who view him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice and arrogance. The successful takeoff, executed flawlessly by the pilot he had claimed was unqualified, serves as the final proof of just how wrong one person can be about everything. The Boeing 737 touches down at LaGuardia Airport with the kind of smooth precision that comes from exceptional skill and years of experience. The landing is so gentle that several passengers comment appreciatively as the aircraft rolls toward the gate. In the cockpit, First Officer Ella Williams completes her post-flight checklist with the same methodical professionalism that has defined her entire career. As the aircraft reaches the gate and the engines wind down, Captain Henderson's voice fills the cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York's LaGuardia Airport. I want to personally thank First Officer Williams for an outstanding flight. Her expertise and professionalism represent the very best of commercial aviation." The announcement draws spontaneous applause from throughout the cabin, with passengers expressing their appreciation not just for the smooth flight, but for Ella's handling of the earlier confrontation. Richard Sterling remains slumped in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone as the applause continues around him. Mr. Peterson stands to retrieve his carry-on luggage and pauses beside Richard's seat. "You know," he says quietly, "I hope you learned something today. Officer Williams showed you more grace than you deserved." Without waiting for a response, he moves toward the exit. As passengers begin to deplane, many make a point of thanking Ella personally as she stands near the cockpit door in her pilot's uniform, having changed during the flight. Their comments range from simple appreciation for the smooth flight to more specific acknowledgments of how she handled Richard's challenges. "Officer Williams," says the woman who had spoken up during the confrontation, "thank you for showing all of us what true professionalism looks like. My daughter is studying aerospace engineering, and you've given me the perfect example of grace under pressure to share with her." Ella's response is characteristically humble. "Thank you for your kind words. Please tell your daughter that aviation needs more people who are passionate about safety and excellence. That's all that really matters in this profession." Richard finally gathers the courage to approach Ella as the cabin empties. His earlier arrogance has been completely replaced by obvious shame and remorse. "Officer Williams," he says hesitantly, "I know I already apologized, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. I was wrong about everything, and there's no excuse for my behavior." Ella looks at him with the same professional courtesy she's shown throughout their interaction. "Mr. Sterling, I appreciate your apology. I hope this experience helps you understand that credentials and qualifications come in many different forms. Excellence isn't limited by the stereotypes we sometimes carry." Richard nods miserably. "I've learned that lesson the hard way. I hope you won't let what I did affect how you see other passengers." "Mr. Sterling?" Ella replies with a slight smile. "I've encountered prejudice throughout my career. What I've learned is that education and exposure to excellence are the best remedies for ignorance. Today might have been difficult, but if it changes how you view other people, then something positive came from it." Her generosity in the face of his behavior leaves Richard feeling even more ashamed of his actions. He exits the aircraft without another word, knowing that he'll carry the memory of this encounter for the rest of his life. Within hours of the flight's arrival, Mr. Peterson's LinkedIn post about the incident begins to gain traction. His detailed account of Ella's professionalism and Richard's inappropriate behavior resonates with thousands of readers who share their own experiences with workplace discrimination and prejudice. The post quickly spreads beyond LinkedIn to other social media platforms, with Pilot Williams becoming a trending topic by the end of the day. Aviation professionals, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens share the story as an example of grace under pressure, and the importance of judging people by their qualifications rather than their appearance. Major news outlets pick up the story within 48 hours, interviewing Ella about her experience and her perspective on discrimination in aviation. Her interviews are marked by the same professionalism and thoughtfulness she displayed during the original confrontation, refusing to vilify Richard while using the platform to discuss broader issues of diversity and inclusion in her industry. The airline's response is swift and decisive. Richard's diamond medallion status is permanently revoked, and he's banned from flying with the carrier pending a formal review of the incident. The company releases a statement supporting Ella and reaffirming their commitment to diversity and respect for all passengers and crew members. Ella's story resonates particularly strongly within the aviation community, where discrimination has been a persistent challenge. Flight schools report increased interest from underrepresented groups, and several major airlines announce new initiatives to promote diversity in their pilot recruitment programs. Richard Sterling's consequences extend far beyond his travel privileges. The viral nature of the story reaches his professional contacts, and Sterling Financial faces significant pressure from clients and business partners who question their association with someone who displayed such obvious prejudice. Within a month, Richard is forced to resign from his position and sell his stake in the company. His personal life suffers similar damage as friends and family members struggle to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the person they saw in the widely shared video footage of the incident. His wife, mortified by the public attention and disgusted by her husband's behavior, files for separation. Ella, meanwhile, finds herself in an unexpected position as a spokesperson for diversity and excellence in aviation. The airline promotes her to captain ahead of schedule, recognizing both her exceptional skills and her ability to represent the company's values under extreme pressure. She uses her newfound platform to establish a scholarship fund for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, naming it the Harold Williams Memorial Fund in honor of her grandfather. The fund receives contributions from airlines, aviation organizations, and thousands of individuals who were inspired by Ella's story. The incident becomes a case study in business schools and diversity training programs, illustrating both the costs of prejudice and the power of responding to discrimination with professionalism and dignity. Ella's handling of the situation is held up as a model for dealing with workplace harassment and bias. A year later, Ella is invited to speak at the Tuskegee Airmen National Convention, where she shares the stage with other aviation pioneers and continues her grandfather's legacy of breaking barriers through excellence. Her speech focuses on the importance of preparing for opportunities while working to change systems that create unnecessary obstacles for qualified individuals. Richard Sterling, meanwhile, struggles to rebuild his life and reputation. He enrolls in diversity training programs and begins volunteering with organizations that promote racial understanding. Though his efforts at redemption are met with skepticism by many who remember his viral moment of prejudice. The story of Flight 8742 serves as a lasting reminder that in an interconnected world, moments of poor judgment can have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate context, while acts of grace and professionalism can inspire positive change that ripples through entire industries and communities. Ella Williams' story didn't end when the aircraft doors opened at LaGuardia. It began there. In a world where first impressions often become final judgments, where assumptions masquerade as insights, and where prejudice still finds ways to disguise itself as procedure, Ella's response offers a masterclass in the power of prepared excellence meeting unexpected opportunity. Think about the Richard Sterlings in your own life, the colleagues who question your presence in meetings, the clients who ask to speak to someone more senior, the strangers who assume your achievements must be mistakes or favors rather than earned victories. Ella's story isn't just about aviation. It's about every boardroom, every classroom, every professional space where someone's worth is prejudged by their appearance rather than their achievements. The most powerful aspect of Ella's response wasn't anger or confrontation. It was competence. She let her credentials speak before her words, allowed her professionalism to shine brighter than Richard's prejudice, and turned a moment of intended humiliation into an opportunity for education. That's not just good strategy. That's the kind of tactical brilliance that changes minds and opens doors for everyone who follows. But here's the provocative truth that makes some people uncomfortable. Ella shouldn't have had to prove anything to Richard Sterling. Her boarding pass was her credential. Her seat was her right. The fact that she handled his challenge with such grace doesn't make his challenge acceptable. It makes her response extraordinary. Every person reading this story has a choice to make. You can be the Richard Sterling, making assumptions based on stereotypes and creating unnecessary barriers for qualified people. Or you can be the Mr. Peterson, recognizing excellence when you see it and speaking up to support those who deserve recognition. Or better yet, you can be the Ella Williams, preparing yourself so thoroughly that when opportunity meets prejudice, excellence wins every time. The airline industry changed because Ella was ready when her moment came. Your industry, your workplace, your community can change too, but only if you're prepared to be the person who responds to ignorance with competence, to assumptions with achievements, and to prejudice with the kind of professional excellence that makes arguments unnecessary. Share Ella's story if you believe that excellence should be measured by performance, not prejudice. Tag someone who needs to understand that credentials come in all colors, all ages, and all backgrounds, because the cockpit of success belongs to everyone qualified to fly it, regardless of who thinks they have the right to question their presence there. Remember, your wings are earned, not granted. Your seat is deserved, not gifted, and your response to those who doubt you will determine not just your own trajectory, but the flight path for everyone who comes after you. The sky belongs to those brave enough to reach for it and skilled enough to navigate it. Make sure you're ready when your moment comes.